We'd like to welcome you here, and we hope that you can take a moment to silence any cell phones as to not disrupt the presentation. As always, we thank you for joining us, and we would like to recognize that the Food for Thought program series here is made possible by the MS Worthington Foundation, and that media sponsorship is generously provided by Novation Media. This afternoon's lecture will be followed by a short Q&A. Today our speaker is Marianne Long, the Education Director for the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, and has been with the organization since 2013. She began her work as a volunteer, donating her time to create outreach programs for youth and families to become engaged in the ongoing research projects, and recently joined the organization as a full-time employee. Marianne attended Coastal Carolina University in Conway, South Carolina, where she studied marine science and participated in a field course at the Bimini Biological Field Station, where her passion for sharks began. Her experiences working with sharks in their natural habitat and seeing firsthand how misunderstood these animals are led her to her work in her career where she could try and change the public perception and replace fear with facts. Let's give a welcome to Marianne.
As we're going through today, if you have questions as I'm explaining things, please just give me a wave and let's turn it into a conversation. But as mentioned, I am the Education Director for the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy. We're a nonprofit organization based in Chatham, and the nonprofit is 5 years old. So it's a fairly new nonprofit, and it was first founded after a conversation. So the white shark research here off the Cape began in 2009, and it's led by Dr. Greg Skomal of the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries. And so one of the founders of the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, Cynthia Wigren, she's currently the CEO of the organization. She had been in a conversation with him and was asking about the methods being used in the shark research, and he voiced how it would be great if there was more funding to support it. As a government employee, there was a limited amount of funds for the white shark research at that time. So what he really explained was that it would be great if a nonprofit was established to help generate more funding to continue the white shark research. So she started the nonprofit. And that's a big part of what we do. We generate funds to support the white shark research that's taking place off of the Cape, and it is still led by Dr. Greg Skomal working for the Division of Marine Fisheries. What we're also doing is working in public safety initiatives. So by being a part of the research, we're right there, we understand what's happening, and then we can go and sit down with public officials, and we can have conversations to put public safety initiatives into practice. And then what we're also doing is education, because we would like to see the conservation of these animals. And so by outreach events like this, we have a facility in Chatham where you can come and learn about the research. We're trying to change the conversation around white sharks, because historically, people haven't really loved this animal. When the nonprofit started, a lot of people had that question, why sharks? Why is it that we want to conserve this animal? Is this animal really as important as people say? And so getting people to see and understand what this animal is and why it's important, because for the most part, people forget that this is a predator. Not just any predator, white sharks are an apex predator, meaning they are at the very top of our marine food web. So they have a really important job. By being there at the top, they're going to help to control and maintain the natural balance of our natural food web in the marine ecosystem. And so a lot of conversation now is taking place with the seal populations. And people are wondering, do we have too many seals? Do we have not enough seals? But what's going to control and help to maintain that seal population? It's the white sharks. So they have an important job in our marine ecosystem. So getting people to see and understand what that role is a big part of what we do so we can change that conversation. Because everyone looks at them as this eating machine. And I like to explain to people, they are an eating machine. Absolutely. It's what they're known for, but it's what they're made for as well. And one of the things to remember is, who here likes to eat? Everyone's here to eat lunch today, right? as a living thing, they absolutely have to eat. But being this top predator, they are specially designed to go after prey items, specifically ones that are rich in blubber, like the seals. So we've always had white sharks off our coast. The difference is with this growing seal population and the seals hauling out on sandbars like you see up here, the white sharks are now patrolling into more shallow water, waiting for those seals to actually dive into the water there so then they can feed on them. So the seal population has brought the sharks into a place where, for us as scientists, we have better access to them. We're actually able to find them along our coastline to then conduct research projects. And they're going after these seals because of that blubber. It's rich in nutrients. That's what they want to eat. These sharks don't want to eat us. They are a very large size. Female sharks, on average, can be up to 18 feet, males up to 16 feet, and we're looking at the white sharks. It's a really big animal. So they need a really big lunch. The seals they're going after are anywhere from 400 to 600 pounds for the most part. And on this seal, you can see that nice white shark bite mark right towards the back of it there. And when the sharks, see if we can get this, go in to feed on the seals, they're going to go in, and they often, what they try to do is first make a kill bite. And so they're going to bite in, and hopefully then the seal will swim off a little bit and it will die, and then they'll come back and take larger chunks out of it. And then sharks actually swallow their food whole. So both the mechanical and chemical digestion takes place in their stomach. Their stomach is lined with what looks like teeth. That does allow them to actually break down that food. But again, it's that rich, blubbery substance on those seals that these sharks want. And they need a good amount of energy to actually carry out their natural behaviors. But even though these sharks are going into shallow water along the coastline, it's not easy to find them. So we work with a spotter pilot. So on a typical research day, and it is absolutely weather dependent, the spotter pilot has to be able to fly up. So he flies out of the Chatham Airport. His name is Mr. Wayne Davis. And once he gets up in the sky, he's going to start looking for the white sharks. When he's up there flying, he can tell the difference between a shark, a seal. He's able to see a lot of different whale species off the coast as well. But even from the air, he can make that differentiation. If a white shark is within 18 feet of the surface, he can see the shark. So then, while he's up flying, trying to find a shark, the research vessel, which is based in Chatham Harbor, is going to head over the Chatham Bar, and they're going to head out there, and they're going to wait for him to come up on a shark. So when they come out of Chatham Harbor, there's different places that they can go. But all of the research so far has been taking place on the outer cape. A lot of times, they'll end up going towards the south. So when you go down towards the south out of Chatham, you come into the Monomoy Wildlife Refuge. That's where we see the biggest seal haulouts on the cape. So it makes sense, just like we like to hang out in the kitchen, because that's where the food is, the sharks like to hang out down by Monomoy, because that's where the food is. So they might go down towards the south, and if Wayne's able to find a shark down there, that's where they'll be for a good amount of time, or they'll head towards the north and they'll work off Orleans. Sometimes they go by Wellfleet, and there are some days that they end up working all the way off of Provincetown. When they come up on the shark, the first thing that they are doing now is they're actually putting GoPro cameras in the water. So in 2009, when the research started, it started with a movement study. And they were collecting data, putting tags on the sharks, and learning about what it was and where they were going. But then people started asking the question, well, how many sharks are there? And Dr. Scommel got sick of not having an answer. So he teamed up with PhD student Megan Winton, and they are currently undergoing the first population study of its kind here in the Northwest Atlantic. So when they come up on the shark, they go out on the pulpit of the boat, which you can see there, and they're putting those GoPros in the water. They also have GoPros on the boat to capture anything if the fins break the surface. And then they're going to put that GoPro in, and they're going to try to get underwater footage of both the left side of the shark and the right side of the shark. They want full imagery of the entire shark, and then they go back to the lab and they break that video down into still photographs. And in going over those photographs, they're looking for identifying markers. Most people, when they think of white sharks, they think they all look the same. They all look like jaws. The reality is they have identifying features just like you and I do that allow us to tell one individual from another. And there are different places on the shark that they're going to look to find those identifying features. So they might look on the dorsal fin. Dorsal fins can have color markings on them, like you can see in this bottom photo circled. There's that white triangle there. There's also that white triangle can even be spotted from aerial footage as well. So we can see it from both the underwater footage and some of the aerial footage. They're also looking towards the gill slits. So right in between those gill slits, there's 5 gill slits on either side of the white shark's body. When it shades from white to gray, think of it as being an area where there could be freckles. There can be different patterns of spots, and they can have different areas where the white can go up further on one shark than on another. So they'll zoom into that area and try to identify features there, as well as on the caudal fin. So they're looking in different places. With each shark, ideally, they're going to get 3, hopefully 5 identifying markers. They absolutely need more than 1, however, because just like you and I, our body can change over time. They want to make sure that if something were to happen to this shark, they don't want to miss that. If a scar all of a sudden forms, it wasn't there before, they don't want to mark it as a new shark. So they're looking, and then when they compare video footage, they try to match up multiple identifying markers to see, is this a shark that we've seen before, in which case it's cataloged as a recapture. If it's a new shark, it's cataloged as a mark. So with this population study, it's called a mark recapture. And they're collecting this data for 5 years. And now that we are in 2018, this is the 5th and final year of data collection for this study. So all of the mark recapture data from the last 5 years will be put into some formulas and combined with an aerial survey. So twice a week, we have a spotter pilot who also flies from Chatham up to Provincetown and then back. And he's got a GoPro camera attached to the front of his plane. And then when we review that imagery after, we've tried to pick out where and how many of those sharks he spotted along that transect flight. And so that data, the mark recapture data, as well as some of the movement data, is all being combined to come up with this population estimate, which should be 1 more year of data, and then it'll probably be about 1.5 years after that. They'll hopefully have the first number for about how many white sharks are here in the Northwest Atlantic. So since it started, they've identified over 300 individual white sharks off the coastline here. Excuse me? They have not. So it would still, so the population estimate is for the entire Northwest Atlantic. So it would include the Nantucket area. We do have a receiver, and I'll talk about that in just a moment when I get into the tagging here off Nantucket. So we are observing some of the movement of sharks in this area. So this image shows you, but zoomed in as I was talking about those color patterns. It's also not just on the gill slits, but you can see this on the caudal fin. But then this also highlights, as I had mentioned, an injury. So when you look at Lynn and you look at the upper lobe of her caudal fin, you can see how it's split there. And so that will never fully heal. She'll always have a chip to that upper lobe of the caudal fin there, but that we can use those scars for markings on them, but we also want to look for other markings around the shark. And what's been cool with this is that it's also allowed us to help track some of the movement of the sharks by identifying them as individuals. The top photo, as you can tell by how clear and beautiful the visibility is, was not taken here in Massachusetts. It was taken down in Florida, but that same shark was here in Massachusetts, and that identifying marker that helped, as well as others, truly was that bite out of the pectoral fin there. And even sometimes when the sharks break the surface, like this shark Julia, depending on where the identifying markers are, we can identify them from that as well. So this photo was taken this past year. A minke whale had died off the coast of Provincetown, so Julia came in and had the feast of her life. Okay, talk about nice rich blubber, being able to feed on that whale carcass in the water there. She was able to enjoy a nice big dinner over a few hours. She had completely gorged herself. But Julia was a shark that was normally one of the first sharks to always return to the Cape. She was a typical tourist and showed up around Memorial Day every year, okay? But this year, we hadn't seen any detections from Julia, but then they saw her feeding on this whale. They were able to identify her from the photos, and so it made them realize that something must be off with her tag. It's no longer working. And in a few minutes, I'll show you just some of the different places where Julia's been known to hang out. In working with these animals and getting that underwater footage, one of the important things that I like to share with people is that they are wild animals. And sometimes the sharks cooperate, and as they're coming up, the shark just continues to swim, and they're able to get full identifying footage. Other times, the sharks can be a bit curious, and they do come back and they like to check out the camera, as this shark did here, as you can see. Other times when they're getting that underwater footage, they do have to be sure to get both the left side and the right side of the shark. So there are some days they come up on a shark and they get the footage of the left side, and then the shark takes off, and they aren't able to get the footage of the right side. So working out there, since they're not catching the animals to get this footage, you really never know what's going to happen as they're working them up. After they get that identifying footage, the next thing that's going to happen, if everything is working out, they're going to put a tag on the shark. As I said, so far they've identified over 300 individual white sharks off the coast of Cape Cod. They have not tagged that many, because what people don't realize is that it's very hard to get a tag on these large fish because they're not catching the sharks. The sharks are free swimming in the water, and that way, because they're free swimming, the shark has to come at least 2 feet up of the surface so that then they can attach that tag properly along the dorsal fin. And there are a few different tags that they are using. The first tag that they've been using the longest is the Acoustic tag, and it's just a little bigger than this model that I have here. And it gets attached right along the dorsal fin of the shark. So it would have a long metal clip on it that they're going to use along what looks like one of these harpoons, and they're going to dart it into the muscle of the shark along the dorsal fin, and it's going to trail off of it. And think of this tag like the Easy Pass that's in your car. So the shark now has this tag, and all around the Cape, as well as we have one here off of Nantucket by Muskeget, we have yellow spar buoys, and at the base of that buoy underwater is what's called a receiver. That receiver is like the toll booth that you drive through with your Easy Pass. When you drive through that toll booth, you're not doing anything, but because of that transponder you have in your car, it knows exactly who you are, the date and the time that you went through that toll. These receivers take in the code from these acoustic tags, and it marks which shark it is with the shark's ID, the date and the time that the shark was in that area. This technology that we have been using doesn't give us information in real time. So then what we have to do is we have to go out, we have to take that receiver out of the water, download it onto a computer, and then review that data. In 2017, the one here off Nantucket, it did have detections from one individual white shark. Compared to off of Monomoy, 42 different sharks were detected off of that receiver over there. Yeah? They have to come it's within about 300 yards. Yeah. And so as I brought up Julia before, what we're then able to do based on the acoustic array, we can see some of the frequency. How often are some of these sharks visiting an area, as well as where are the different sharks going? So the yellow dots here show you where Julia has been. The red show you where another shark, Large Marge, has been. And this was over the course of one season. So Julia really enjoyed hanging out down at the Shark Cafe down by Monomoy. Probably did a lot of feeding down there, and then she'd trek up to Provincetown for a bit, and then maybe she'd come back. Whereas Large Marge really just enjoyed hanging out along the Nauset Beach area, okay? Now, in the beginning, when I talked about the mission of the Conservancy and what it is that we're trying to do, remember how I talked about how another big focal point is the public safety? Having this data is a perfect example of how the ongoing research can help in public safety initiatives. Because then this showed how one of the largest sharks that's been identified in the catalog was hanging out off of Nauset Beach, one of the most frequently visited beaches on Cape Cod. So then having that data and being able to see that, and then as more sharks were being detected in off that receiver, conversations were had about what kind of initiatives should be put into place in that area to keep beachgoers safe. The other type of tag that they have been using when they can is called a PSAT tag, and it's a bit better. It's a bit better in collecting more data as well as bigger. So you can see here, these tags have a floater and an antenna attached to them. So these tags aren't going to be permanently affixed to the shark. They're clipped in and they're deployed the same way that the shark is free swimming in the water, but they have a timer on them, and they're actually going to pop off after 6 months, and they're going to float to the surface, and then they're able to transmit the data that they collect. And what these tags are collecting is the depth at which the shark is swimming, the water temperature in which they're swimming in, the light penetration, as well as the movement. So it's a more sophisticated tag. We haven't deployed as many of these. Part of that is because of the funding. An acoustic tag costs $400. This tag costs $4,500. So it's a bit more expensive to be able to deploy. If they can, when they have these, they will also often deploy an acoustic tag with it. Because the acoustic tag, amazingly enough, has a battery in it. It has a life of about 10 years. Your cell phone doesn't last 24 hours, but the battery on this tag that's constantly sending out a signal can last 10 years. The tags don't usually last on the shark for 10 years, but they can give us multi-years of data from the shark, whereas this is going to pop off after 6 months. The other tags that we have been using are called spot tags, and these actually do give us real-time information. The hard thing about these is that, as you can see from this image, you have to catch the shark in order to attach it. It has to be permanently affixed to the top of the dorsal fin in order for it to work. So there's a fisherman down off the coast of South Carolina. His name is Chip, and he's been working with Dr. Scommel to deploy some of these tags on white sharks that he's caught down there. He brings them right along the side of the boat, and then he's able to clamp this onto the dorsal fin. What happens is when the shark is swimming through the water, if the dorsal fin actually breaks the surface of the water and this antenna is out, takes about 90 seconds because it needs to dry off. It's then going to transmit a signal to the satellite in space, and we're able to pinpoint exactly where that shark is at that moment. So it gives us that real-time information, which the acoustic tag and the PSAT tag aren't able to do. Which, when I start talking about that, a lot of people are surprised. You think about all the advances we have in technology. So with those acoustic tags and the receivers we have that we've been able to deploy around the Cape, around the islands. We have more even now up in the South Shore region. It's kind of surprising that why doesn't that give us real time? And the thing to remember is that salt water is not an easy thing to work in. We have had a prototype in the water of a real-time receiver that would transmit every time it detects a shark. And towards the end of last year, that prototype was working, but then comes the funding. Having that kind of technology working and then being maintained in salt water has a big price tag to it. So that's one of the next phases of things that we're looking to help fund in this area is those real-time receivers. This shows you some of the data from that spot tag. So you can see that path from one of the sharks, Miss Carolina, as she traveled from South Carolina to Georgia down to Florida. And the acoustics, so the spot tags give us that long-range data. What's great is with the acoustic array, we still get the long-range data. Because here off of Massachusetts, the Conservancy, working with DMF, is funding several receivers off the coast, but then Northeastern University has a research group, and they have receivers off the coast for work that they're doing with other species. Just like when you go from Massachusetts into New Hampshire, your Easy Pass still works, the acoustics tag still works on the receivers, regardless of who it is deploying them. So we're able to collaborate with other scientists here in Massachusetts, as well as in the Carolinas, down in Florida, and we have been able to track the movement of the white sharks here into all the different places that they're going. In the very beginning, when they started tagging the sharks, it was thought that they are pretty similar to the snowbirds. They'd come here in the warmer months, and then they'd go down to Florida in the colder months. But then we started seeing not all of them were going all the way to Florida. Some of them were going to the Carolinas, and some weren't going to warm weather at all. Some were actually going north to Canada. We have one white shark, Pumpkin, who's been tagged, and Pumpkin likes to go up towards Canada. So there's a scientist down there who had called up at one point and said, I think I have one of your white sharks up here. And then several more have pinged in on his receiver array that he has up off his coastline. As the research continues, every day, as I said, is a bit different. Some days they go out there and they don't have the best of luck finding sharks. Other days it's like this, where they have their option of sharks to choose from. The research boat tries to be out 2 days a week from mid-June until the end of October. But as I said before, that is weather dependent, and they're out there for a full day. But the cost of that research day is expensive. You're paying for the boat, you're paying for a spotter pilot to be in the air, and then there's the price of the different tags that I explained in the beginning. But as we look at the movement of this animal, it really does help in the conservation efforts. Here in the Northwest Atlantic, we don't know a lot about white sharks. When you start talking about white sharks, people think, well, research has been going on with them for such a great deal of time. Well, it has in places like South Africa, or places like Guadalupe Island, Farallon Islands, areas where there's been a known population of white sharks for a long period of time, so they've been conducting research on them for a long period of time. Here in the Atlantic, we never had a hot spot. There was never one place where they had predictable access to this animal year after year so that they could conduct this research project. That changed as the seal population grew. With that growing seal population, this has become a feeding area for the white sharks, and the Cape Cod region is now a hotspot for white sharks, so scientists have that predictable access. And so that often leads to the question, well, why did this seal population actually rebound? And that is the result of the Marine Mammal Protection Act that passed in 1972. The seals had previously been hunted to a point of near extinction. That piece of legislation was able to then, it's a great success story where science and legislators work together, which doesn't often happen, okay? But they were able to work together, and we've been able to see that population rebound. And with the rebound, the sharks are coming into this area. They're coming back year after year, and we're able to understand and answer questions about this animal we haven't answered before, like the different places that they're going and how many are there. Future questions, we're going to try to answer as well. Very often people ask, well, where's the pupping ground for white sharks? If you talk to some fishermen off the coast of New York or New Jersey, they say that's the pupping ground because for many years they've been catching white shark pups in that region, but we don't actually have the true data to prove it. So that's one thing, as well as where is it that they're mating? So it is an internal fertilization, so you have to have a male and a female white shark come together, but we don't know where they're actually going to mate. So those are big questions that people would like to hope to find out as well as this research continues. But getting people to understand this research and the importance of this animal in our ecosystem, as a nonprofit, is a big thing that we have to do. And reminding people that these animals are not the man-eating villain that you saw in the movie Jaws. They are a fish. They're a large fish that likes to eat, but those large teeth, the big fins that allow them to swim at top speeds, make them the top predator that they are. But the top predator that they are is an apex predator, which, as I said in the beginning, is going to help to maintain our ocean ecosystem and maintain that balance. But in saying that, it's not that we want to glorify this animal. We want people to gain an understanding of respect, of why we need it. We also want people to remember that this is a wild animal, and we're seeing it coming into shallow water off of some of our popular beaches. Does that mean you have to stop using the water recreationally? No. I'm a stand-up paddleboarder, and I still bring my paddleboard out there. Do I think about where I go before I go now? Absolutely. And do I try to go with friends so I'm in a group? Absolutely. So things to remember, don't go near the seals, okay? They look cute, but they're actually a predator as well, and they can be pretty aggressive. So you really don't want to approach the seals. Now you can't go to the beach anywhere around here without seeing at least one. But when we talk about avoiding them, we're talking about when there's a group of them, because then that scent is stronger. So you want to avoid being anywhere where they are. And it's not just when you're swimming, it's also when you're paddleboarding or when you're kayaking, okay? So you want to avoid being near those groups of seals. You also want to avoid being in the water at dawn and dusk. Sharks at that time do have really great eyesight. So they have a lens in their eye that's round like a cat, so it helps them to better reflect and bend the light. So they have the advantage at that time, those dawn and dusk hours. So you don't want to be out in deep water around those times. The recommendation from the National Seashore now is you don't go beyond waist deep in the water, especially in waters where we know the white sharks have been patrolling off that coastline there. The other thing that you can do is you can download our free public safety app. It's called Sharktivity, and it's a free download that arms you with the data. So as the research boat is out, those blue fins you can see on the app, those mark sightings. So whenever they're out there, if they see a shark, they're going to upload that information on the app. So then you know, and you can look at it and say, okay, well, I'm going to go over towards Nauset Beach today, if you're over on the Cape. But you looked at yesterday, there were 6 sharks spotted off that beach. You might choose to go in towards the bayside instead. But at least you have that knowledge, and then you can make that choice. It also is uploaded, the orange piece shows white shark detections. Those receivers that I was talking about, like the one off Muskeget, as we get that data in and we're able to go out and check those, we put that information up onto the app as well. Again, arming you with that data so you can make a decision on how and where you want to use the water recreationally. And if you don't want to use it on the app, you can also pull it up on the computer right through our website so you can follow where the different sightings have taken place. And one of the success stories with this app really happened in the first year that we had it. And that the research boat was out, and they were following a shark, and they realized that it was getting in pretty close to shore. And it wasn't one of the public beaches, but they could see a boat had pulled up, and the kids were playing in the surf there. So one of the other things that this app can do is it can actually send you a push notification. So they pulled it out, they sent out the push notification, and then they were able to actually watch and see as the mom saw her phone go off, so she picked it up, realized it was a push notification, pulled her kids out of the water, and then the shark swam by, and instead of something bad happening, they heard the excitement of the kids, "Look, it's a shark!" as they start to swim by while they were in the boat safely. So it's a great thing that you can arm yourself with to have access to that data. The other thing to think about is, what is it actually going to look like if you were to see a shark off our coast, specifically a white shark? Because we've got lots of sharks off our coast. Living here in Massachusetts, we're pretty fortunate. We have incredible wildlife, and everyone often thinks that you might have that Jaws moment if a white shark is coming. I had one kid that when I did a program, he said, well, when I hear the music, that dun-dun, dun-dun, I had to explain to him that that really doesn't happen in real life, and that this animal has become the apex predator it has because it has the ability to sneak up on things. So it's even rare that you would see the dorsal fin break the surface. When the research boat is out, they often call it shadow chasing, because as what you see here, that silhouette of the shark in the water, that's probably what you're going to see. And sometimes people see this, and then that fin does break the surface, but they start realizing, they look at the fin, and it's a very rounded dorsal fin. And that's not a white shark. Then that's most likely a basking shark. Or sometimes from a distance, they see a fin in the water and they think it's a white shark, but then that fin starts flapping around in the water. Anyone know what that is? A sunfish, a mola mola, okay? But I grew up on the South Shore, and I remember one year, there was all this talk, oh my gosh, there's a white shark off of Wessagusset Beach in Weymouth, and then a friend sent me the video and I could see it, and it was totally a mola mola, but they had cleared the entire beach. So it's important to be familiar with what it is that you could possibly see if you are out there. If it is a nice clear day, you might have a better picture, as you can see here. This was a photo that was sent in to us from someone who was out there and they saw a white shark. And she sent this photo in by actually using our app. Okay, so that app Sharktivity, it also allows you to be a citizen scientist. So if you're out on the water and you spot a shark, you can take a photo of it and upload it into the website, and then you're helping us to identify and follow the movement of these sharks. So at this point, as I start to wind down, are there any questions so far? Yes. So even though we have all these sharks off our area, for the most part, white sharks are solitary. So they're really not traveling together. They're not an animal that comes together in a pod in schools. They're more solitary. We do have a good amount of male sharks. So when I talk about the sharks and refer to them by name, once they're identified, we usually do give them a name. Names are based off different things. A lot of them are based off of their markings. So there's one white shark, Scratchy. Scratchy got its name because as it went in to eat a seal, didn't wait for the seal to die before it fed on it, so the seal fought back. And seals have pretty big claws. So Scratchy has scratch marks all over his face. There's other sharks that are named for their behaviors. So there's one white shark who got the name Mr. Frisky, because as they were coming up to try to get that identifying footage of the shark, this was a shark that was not cooperating. They came up and the shark started going this way, so the boat went this way, and what do you think Mr. Frisky did? Bam, took off this way. So they repositioned the boat, they're following him this way, bam, Mr. Frisky goes back this way. So it took a lot of effort to get the underwater footage of both the right side and the left side of him. Other sharks have been named for people. And as a nonprofit organization, really trying to get people to understand what kind of research is taking place, as well as just the fact that we have white sharks off our coast, we realize that if you name a shark after a celebrity like Tom Brady, people get interested. And all sorts of news outlets will pick up that story and talk about white shark Brady and comparing it to the goat himself. So Brady was one of the first sharks that we named after a celebrity. When we saw how it really inspired this conversation amongst people, it's amazing because so many people, if they don't follow the news all that often, they don't realize that there are these white sharks off our coast. And that's what's scary to us, is all these people who use the water in different ways recreationally who really have no idea about this animal being out there. So we saw the impact Brady had. So then a few years ago, when David Ortiz himself was getting ready to retire, we waited all summer long for a big male white shark that would be worthy of the name Big Papi. And finally, it was in September. They put a tag on one. And so then that really got a lot of attention in positive ways, talking about the research and how this research is helping in conservation, and got people realizing and seeing about that work, as well as that conversation about, oh yeah, there's white sharks off our coast. We should remember that when we're out there by the water. So that's some of the strategy behind the naming of the different sharks. We do have a good amount of both female and male sharks that have been identified. So we've identified over 300 since the population study started, and I don't know what the exact breakdown is of male to female at this time. There are some that have been identified, or some that have been tagged that we actually even don't have sex, depending on if they were tagged earlier on before the population study started. Yeah? So that's one of the things we know that they stay within the Northwest Atlantic region. So this population, these sharks, from what we know, are not going over to, say, South Africa. So they're staying, more in this area. But depending on the tag, so there's a few years ago, there was one white shark, Lydia, and for the most part, we thought they always stuck right along the coastline. But that was because with the acoustic array, those receivers, they're attached to a mushroom anchor. So they have to be in more shallow water. So we weren't able to really follow that movement of the sharks out into deeper water until the development of the spot tags, because those work when the shark breaks surface, doesn't matter where they're going. So we started following Lydia, and all of a sudden she broke away from the coast, and she starts making her way out into the Atlantic. So everyone's kind of cheering Lydia on. Like, where are you going to go? What's going to happen? And she crossed over the mid-Atlantic ridge, at which point some newspaper in the UK put up the headline, of course, "White shark headed our way." She never made it fully to the UK. She ended up looping back and coming back in towards this coastline. But because of that tag advancement, we never knew that the white sharks were going out that far into the Atlantic. So those are things that we're still really gaining that understanding of. So the more technology advances we have, the more we can learn in that way. Yeah. So as a nonprofit, and when I said in the beginning, our focus really started in looking to fund the white shark research, use it in public safety initiatives, as well as educating the public. We've had some other things come up in the last 5 years, some that have been pretty surprising to us, like what you see here. A few years ago onto the Cape, we had several white sharks that actually stranded. And as I said in the beginning, when this organization was founded, a lot of people had that question, well, why sharks? Why do we need to care about them, and why do we need to save them? And what you see here is this white shark that stranded on Wellfleet Beach. And this happened about 2.5 or maybe 3 years into the start of the organization. And none of these people came to the beach wanting to see this shark die. All of these people at this point had learned the importance of this animal, and they were there to then help save this animal. So what they had done is they helped to dig a trench. They had a bucket brigade of water that they were dumping over the gills of the shark to try to keep oxygen flowing through the bloodstream. Waiting for a boat to come up, they put a tail wrap, and they're actually able to get this shark back out into the water. Unfortunately, this shark did not survive, but from a dead shark, you do learn a lot. So people often ask about the aging of white sharks. They can live to be over 70 years old. We can only figure out how old they are if they're dead. You actually age a shark by looking at the individual vertebra centerpieces in their spine. And just like you count the rings on a tree cookie, you can count the rings on each individual vertebra centerpiece to figure out how old they are. But the animal has to be deceased in order for us to get that data collection. So we were able to learn a lot from this animal. Also that summer, we had another shark, Jameson, who stranded, and Jameson, at least, did survive. We were able to get him back out into the water quicker. He was a smaller white shark, and we've gotten data from Jameson. He took off, went down to South Carolina, and made his way back up to Cape Cod the following year. So we're starting to see that change in public perception. People are starting to have that realization of, yeah, they're a big animal, but they're a big animal that we need in our marine environment, which has been really exciting for us as an organization to see. One of the other pieces that I want to touch base on today, just because it's been a recent current event, normally you don't hear a lot of shark news here in New England in the winter months. But we got a lot of press in those few days after Christmas when we had that real cold weather. And often in the fall, you hear about the sea turtles that strand and go into cold shock in Cape Cod Bay. Well, after Christmas, it was thresher sharks. So a few days after Christmas, we started getting reports of people walking the beaches in Orleans, Brewster, and Wellfleet who were finding these thresher sharks that had washed up onto the beach. So thresher sharks are typically out in deeper water. They're a pelagic species of shark. The common thresher can be up to maximum about 20 feet. But what's really amazing about this animal, this one was 14 feet. It's 7 feet of body and then another 7 feet just of tail. The upper lobe of the caudal fin that they use to stun their prey so they can feed on them is the same size as the rest of their body. So these sharks are off our coast in the summer months feeding. Some will even go as far north up into the Gulf of Maine. But then once it starts to get cold, they'll make their way down south towards the Carolinas. Well, these 4 sharks, I'm not trying to pass any judgment, but all 4 were males. Instead of staying on the outer side of the Cape, they made their way into Cape Cod Bay. And then we had that real cold snap of weather and the temperature in the bay dropped really quickly. These sharks couldn't find their way out. And so they got into more shallow water, and you have a big tidal influx in Cape Cod Bay. And so they got into the shallows and then couldn't get out. And so they suffocated. There were some reports, they were calling them sharksicles. So a lot of kids, when I've gone into schools, ask about the sharks that got frozen in icebergs. That's not how they died. They didn't actually get frozen in the iceberg, but they got stuck on the beaches. And as a fish, they have to be in the water in order to breathe. And so once they were out of water, they could no longer breathe and they died. And then because the ice packs were moving in, they pushed them further up on the beach. But again, you learn a lot from a dead shark. So then we were able to go out and we took different samplings from these. One of the sharks we fully moved to a lab down in Narragansett in Rhode Island. Dr. Lisa Natanson there actually runs the Apex Predator program for the NOAA service. And so she was able to do a full necropsy and get all sorts of samples and data collected from that animal. No, there were different, so one of the things that they've been looking at with shark strandings is that they've actually been taking samples from the brain because they've identified some sharks have stranded because they have a bacteria in their brain, or that's what they're thinking, but nothing came back with that one, and so there was never really a known cause. It's thought that possibly what could have happened is on a lot of those beaches up in Wellfleet, similar, you have a big tidal drop. And that all of a sudden, you could be going from about waist deep, you take another step and it drops. If it had come in feeding and it came in on a wave and got too shallow, it was a bigger one and it couldn't get itself back off the beach. And then as the tide went out, it did fully strand. So I think it probably was something along those lines that it got caught on, a sandbar as it was coming in to try to feed. So. I'm not sure about that. A lot of those samples that get sent out get sent to all various labs. And to be honest, I haven't really seen a lot of that data that's come back to us. So I don't have the direct answer for that one. Is there another question here? Yeah? So sharks do have an inner ear. They use it more for the directionality of sounds. The hard part when you look at sharks is they don't communicate in the way that whales do. And when you look at different species of shark, there's over 400. It might affect some, but you'd have to really, for that part, look at each individual species. But one of the notes I did want to end on is the things that all of you can do to help us in shark conservation. So one of the biggest things, and you hear it talked about all the time now, marine debris. Whether it is that you're out walking on the street here, you're walking on the beach, if you see something that should be in a recycle bin or a trash can, please help us out by picking it up. This is white shark Luca, and I will admit this picture was not taken here off the Cape, but I got to see Luca when I was diving off of Guadalupe Island, and Luca was the most beautiful shark as it came swimming at us, and then Luca turned. Do you see all those scars along Luca's back? And you can see the notch that was cut into his dorsal fin. Luca got wrapped up in a bunch of lines. And a diver had to go in and cut those off. And more they were talking about the sharks that they were seeing with scarring from the different lines and fishing gear that gets out there. But all sorts of marine animals are really suffering from the marine debris. And then you talk about the biotoxins, the smaller marine animals who eat those plastics, and then it gets ingested in, and then that toxin, as it goes up the food chain. So one of the biggest things that everyone can do to help in conservation, not just of sharks, but of our ocean in general, is help us to pick up that marine debris. One of the other things is all of you are now shark smart. You know, I appreciate you all coming today to learn about the ongoing shark research, learn about the importance of white sharks in our ecosystem. Do me a favor and share it with someone. Talk about it. When they talk about how we have these big, scary sharks off our coastline, say, yeah, they're pretty big, but did you know this about the sharks? Did you know that when they're tagging them, they're able to follow them from the Cape down to Florida or down to the Carolinas? Try to change the conversation around this animal because that can have a big impact in conservation. One of the other pieces that you can do is just stay connected and know what's going on. So the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, as I said, has a facility in Chatham. We're open seasonally from Memorial Day to Columbus Day. So if you're off the island of Nantucket here, please come over and see us. Check out our website. Follow us on social media on all forms. You can also, if you really want to be the cool kid driving around here, get a white shark license plate. So we have those on the road now as well. So that's my piece. But is there any more questions before people start to head out? Yeah. So a lot of shark tournaments have actually changed over the years, in that many shark tournaments that are run now actually require all of the catches to then be brought in and sampled by scientists. So Dr. Lisa Natanson that I was talking about, a lot of her work, she needs dead sharks. So she works and goes to a lot of those fishing tournaments and has people bring in those sharks, and it's regulated. They can't just go out and catch any species. They can only catch specific species of shark, and there is a size limitation. But they bring those in, and she's able to take the vertebra samples to learn about aging of the species. She takes tissue samples. So they have those partner. A lot are also catch and release now. So, you know, an observer will be on the boat, and they'll catch them. Sometimes if it's the observer, they'll deploy a tag onto the shark. So it's really changed in how many of those tournaments are now run. Well, yeah? No, not at this time. But we do partner, especially being on the Cape with all of the wildlife. We partner with a lot of organizations for outreach and working. So as I said, for us, we're not the ones directly conducting the research. We are funding the white shark research of Dr. Skolmel, working for DMF. And he, through the research end of it, has several partnerships with the different things that they're doing. So. Well, if anyone else has any questions as you head out today, please feel free to come on up and ask. But thank you so much for coming out today, and it was great to meet all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marianne. That was a great presentation. We welcome you all back to next Thursday's Food for Thought. It is with co-founders Jennifer Cohen and Melissa Murphy on International Women's Day to learn about women engaged in civic action on Nantucket. Have a great rest of your day.